All right, guys, we're gonna do one more short interp lesson for right now. This one is going to be definitely like short is not an understatement on this one. This will probably be one of our quickest podcast episodes, simply because characterization only has so much else that you can say under it. I think we'll also probably talk about some memorization tips at the end of this, because I know it's something that people struggle a lot with. But even shoehorning those two things together, there's simply not too much to say about these general ideas when it comes to interp. So beyond that, we are going to be definitely continuing after our two ones about cutting and selecting a piece. Whenever you do interp, generally you kind of have to do things in a defined order. You can't just kind of like go from like lesson to lesson like we definitely could do under LD. So you got to make sure you've gone and seen those two videos first. So at this point, what you should have is your piece selected, and it definitely cut to a length of about 8 minutes. If you don't have that, you definitely need to get those things first, because characterizing your characters at this point isn't going to really matter if you have to change those characters depending on how you change the cut of your piece. So, assuming all that's done, let's actually get into characterization. So, what this is obviously how we're going to distinguish between the different characters of a piece. Whenever you're doing an HI or duo, or even to a lesser extent like a DI or a prose or poetry or whatever, you're going to have a bunch of different characters, and you have to make it clear to your audience who is who. If you simply just have like very basic poses for each character and voices, that's going to be really hard to distinguish what character is which is exactly why we have these like different characterization poses and voices for characters. That it's that way we can better distinguish one character from another, which is generally what characterization boils down to, right? Obviously, you want to develop a personality for characters, but as long as you can mainly figure out that personality and how their poses and voices are going to differ, then that's when you're going to be like pretty set up for characterization. This is also generally when people start having a lot of fun with interp, because although cutting your piece and becoming like acquainted with it is definitely good times, this is when you get to start doing things like silly voices and like wacky characters with fun pops, which is generally like where people start to fall in love with interp. So whenever you're defining your characters, if you're doing an HI or a DI, you're going to want one really relatable character, which is your like main character. If you're doing an HI, then generally that's going to be kind of like your straight man, right? It's the one that everyone can relate to and like isn't completely off the walls crazy, because that's what the rest of them are going to be. They're going to be completely like abnormal and unbelievable, and obviously something that no one could ever relate to. So we want at least one who's good and relatable. Beyond that, though, you definitely want to start getting to like just absolutely wild and interesting characters. If you don't have that for your HI, that's something that you should think about before you even start trying to like characterize how they're going to stand and such, because without having like those fun characters, your piece is going to be boring. Whenever people think about the best parts of a piece, generally they can link it back to one character who is just so fun. I remember the national champion a couple years ago who did A Tiny Miracle with a Fiber Optic Unicorn. What was so great about his piece was his grandma character is just so funny. Like, that's what I still remember to this day, even though it's been like 2 years since I've gone and actually seen that piece. So that's where it really comes down to whenever you're doing characterization, is first having one character who is super relatable and good, and then starting to get as unique with it as you can, because obviously that's what's going to set your piece apart from other people. Then once you've kind of like developed these personalities for your characters, it comes to like actually being able to show it and to distinguish those characters, because remember, that's what characterization is also about. So when it comes down to it, you want to first focus on your pose. There's a couple of different places that you can really like work on to make these poses big and different, and you can do pretty much anything with them, but there's definitely like certain pivot points that are going to be really useful in changing your pose, like places on your body where if you change those like different stances there, you'll be set up in a better situation. So some good ones that people always talk about are the knees. That's obviously going to change your height, and whenever you change your height by crouching down more or whatever, will definitely change things such as like timidness of a character, are it can be great for like younger characters who obviously like the shorter they are, the younger they are general ideas behind that. And there's not going to be like a hard and fast rule with any of these where it's like if you bend your knees, they become this character. Because as always, that's something that you have to kind of like feel out for yourself. But you can find like different poses and see like what does this speak to you, and then you could run with it. But the knees are one of the like most famous pivot points. The more up and down you go with that, and also what direction you like point your knees in. So if you have them like pointing inwards towards each other, that definitely gives a more timid character. But if you flip them the other way and they're like poking in the other direction, like away from each other, that's someone who's a lot more open because you have a more open body figure. Beyond that, you can also see that same type of thing happen with the feet. These are generally obviously going to be the same because if you have your knees poking inwards, then your feet are going to be poking inwards as well. But you can change like pivot on your heels what direction they're facing. Even if you don't change your knees that much, you can still change your feet. Which obviously is going to once again change how people view the character. Feet may seem like something that is not very noticeable, but it definitely is. So that's always a very important one. And then, of course, there's just basically like your arms and what you're going to be doing with them at the time. This is where you can get the most like creative with your actual like characterization itself, because obviously we're going to have a bunch of blocking throughout the piece, which is going to change like your characterization. But like more importantly, if you want them to be doing some small thing that like shows that it's them. So maybe it can be as simple as their arms being crossed. But like if you have a mom character who doesn't do too much, then like people always like to do things like her stirring like a pot or something. And it's like that one's not overly creative, which is why I would want to do it. It's like not funny, it's just kind of boring. But you can kind of do fun things with that where it's like every time that character shows up, this is what they're doing, and then that definitely makes them distinguishable. So the hands definitely are a big one because you can just do a lot more with them than you can with like the feet or the knees. And on that note, you obviously can also do something with the shoulders as well. This one's not going to be the same type of thing as the hands where it's like, oh, you can do fun things with it. But if your shoulders are like big and broad, then obviously that's going to convey a different message than if they're like in towards each other and you are kind of like hunched over a little bit. But otherwise, there's only so much you could say about poses except for just going out and experimenting yourself, which is also going to be definitely the same thing with voices, especially because voices are like I personally can't make a bunch of different voices. My vocal range is definitely lacking. But this is really just going to be exploring what sounds you can make and like what fun you can have with that. I will say generally we do like this 2-scale thing where you can change your pitch and your tone. And you have like your 4 extremes depending on like with a really high pitched or like low tone or whatever, and you can kind of explore those different extremes and see. And then obviously you have your basic things like different accents from like different countries or whatever. You can even just like do accents of famous people. That's always like a big one. People love to do Trump. It's really overdone at this point, which is once again why I wouldn't do it, because it's like not original anymore. But you can also do like famous character impressions. But beyond that, there's not really too much else to say from voices except for to go and explore yourself. And that's a lot of what characterization is, as I said. So that's why this one's not going to be too terribly long. But for the last minute or so, we will simply talk about memorization on this note, because that's simply that's going to be something you're going to be doing while you're getting the recite piece ready. And there's not too much you can really do to hunker down and get it done right away, or a lot I can teach you as to like how to best memorize your piece. Because when it comes down to it, it just comes from working with your piece a lot and becoming more and more familiar with it, and it'll stick with you over time. But a couple tips, people who are really struggling with it like to like record themselves reading it and then they'll play it. I have done that before for other speeches, like I'll do it while I'm in the shower. People who really struggle with it say that listening to it while they sleep helps a lot. That one's helpful as well. I personally was not a big fan of that one, but maybe that's just because I have a really my brain is very active while I'm sleeping, so it like didn't really contain anything. Otherwise, you can then like quiz yourself. I've set up like Quizlets before with certain lines that I struggle with. That way, I have to like type in exactly what I have to say, or you can work with other people to like quiz yourself. There's a whole bunch of different like unique tips that you can look up online, because obviously it's something that's not like specific to interp, but just an acting thing in general, or even just giving speeches in general, but with memorizing your lines. But there's just a couple tips there. But otherwise, there's not too much to say about this general concept. As with most things in interps, it just kind of comes with working on it yourself and seeing how it goes and seeing what works for you. But as always, I hope this video is educational, and I would wish you good luck in your